Oh, I have a medical condition, all right. It's called caring too much, and it's incurable!
Things that we are not bringing into 2024 LGBT edition. First up, this is for the cishet women who call themselves allies because they watch Drag Race and hang out at gay bars, but would never be caught hanging out with trans men or lesbians because they think they're gross and that they're gonna hit on them. No, stop. Do better or stop calling yourself an ally. Next. To the gay men out there who only hang out with other gay men and cishet women because you think you have nothing in common with lesbians and trans people, cut that shit. You have a lot in common. Those are your brothers and sisters. Expand your friend group. Make an effort to meet queer people who are different from you. And speaking of queer people who may be different from you, stop being ableist. Way too many of you are too comfortable with the way autistic queer people are treated within our community. Oh, but they're cringy because they cosplay and they watch anime and they have pink hair. Shut the fuck up and leave them alone.
In this song, I'm going to teach you the 12 months of the year. Are you ready? Here we go. January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. These are the 12 months of the year.
White dystopian fiction. White dystopian fiction.
Do you want to talk about this? Because yes, white dystopian fiction is always rooted in the actual lived oppression of black and brown people. Which is why I so regularly object to us using white dystopian fiction as some kind of educator on the oppression of humanity. Hunger Games, great series, but where'd she learn it? Handmaid's Tale, a great series, but where'd she learn it? Maze Runner, but where'd he learn it? And I know this doesn't feel like a super important point if that's primarily the type of dystopian stories you read, but I need you to understand that existing in a white body, and we're talking about actual cultural whiteness, not the conditional whiteness that some people are granted, actual whiteness, existing in that body alone costs you some of the nuances of oppression and marginalization that are important for making those kinds of stories work. And even worse, a lot of these authors are not just telling stories about oppression and marginalization, they are justifying them. Look at The Hunger Games. That series is lifted up as a prime example of what it means to really consider the reality of oppression and marginalization. People use it regularly to talk about the horror of our society. And yet that franchise just dropped a major motion picture glorifying that behavior. And I know the thought behind it, because I do understand the idea of wanting to contextualize oppression. But consider the differences in a black or brown author contextualizing oppression and a white author contextualizing it. Whose perspective am I keeping central when I'm writing about oppression? Black people's. So who will I end up not having compassion for when I'm writing that story? The oppressor. White dystopian fiction not only steals from the stories of black and brown people, but its primary effect is not compassion for the oppressed. It's distance between the reader and the crimes of the oppressor. As long as the standard for dystopian literature holds up white faces as the victims of oppression and marginalization, white readers will not have to consider the part that they play in the real-world oppression those books are reflecting. I'm fine with white writers writing dystopian fiction, but I need you to do it different. I need your stories to tell the truth. Force your readers to wrestle with who they actually are in the story, not with who they'd rather not be. And if you want to talk more about how to do that, feel free to follow along.
Did you know that only 60% of people paid that first student loan payment? And that's of the people who owed that first payment, not all of the people who have student loans. Only 60%. That's 9 million people almost that didn't pay that first payment. And I know you've heard about it by now, but I want you to think back. Did you see like a big organized mass movement that we're not going to pay our student loans? Probably not. Like you heard spatterings of conversation, but we didn't really see like a big organized like strike to not pay our student loans. And yet 9 million people organically, for whatever reason, whether it be that they're too expensive, whether that it's student loans or rent, whether that it's all that we just thought that was a very silly thing to do and they didn't need it for the last several years, so they certainly don't need it now. 9 million people were like, no, not going to do that. That had consequences, not for us necessarily, but for them. They are scrambling to figure out what they're going to do to get us to pay our student loans. I want you to know that we can apply that logic and that energy to other places and other spheres, especially if we add like maybe 2% of intentionality. Like, hey guys, we should do this on purpose. We could really make things shake. When they tell you things like, oh, you can't vote third party, that'll never work, there are not enough people, or oh, you can't just disrupt the entire healthcare system or the education system to get anything that resembles equality, because like we're just not unified enough. Remember, almost 9 million people organically did not pay that first student loan payment, and it's sending them in a tizzy. And we didn't plan that, not intentionally. Remember that. Just remember what you're capable of.
I want you to know that this is my very sincere and earnest and honest reaction, okay? Shut the fuck up! Thanks.
I'm so OCD. I like to shower at least once a week.
I have OCD, and every time before I leave the house, I have to videotape myself turning off the stove. And then I just watch it over and over and over again. And I imagine my pets dying a slow death in a fire.
Why? But like, why do you have to check more than once? I feel like that's not...
Well, like, I mean, I'm just trying to be safe. Like, I don't know. And then...
But it was off.
Well, how am I supposed to know? Like, whatever. Okay, let's just do a different
Yeah.
one. Go.
I'm so OCD. When I go to the grocery store, I have to pay for every single item I got.
I have OCD, and one time my coworker brought her baby into the office, and I told her, your baby's so adorable, and then my brain went, that means you're attracted to children.
Oh.
So then I spent like the next year obsessing.
Okay, what the heck is that?
I mean, I'm obviously not attracted to children.
It's like literally a baby.
No, okay, well, I spent the next year avoiding all children, like it's not a big deal. Okay, one more.
Yeah. I'm so OCD. When I'm driving, I like to stop at every single red light.
I have OCD, and every time I'm on like a balcony or a cliff, I just think about like yeeting myself off the edge.
Stops.
Like,
I don't think we're gonna do these anymore.
I don't know what's the problem? Why? Like,
it's just like too dark.
I tried to keep it pretty light, but whatever. Let's just go.
Okay.
1 million homeless people in America. The average age being 9 years old, and I don't give a fuck! I don't care about fucking homeless people!
I'm autistic. No, see, I don't think you're autistic. I have a child on the autism spectrum, and you don't act anything like him. Well, autism is a spectrum, like you said, so it looks different in every autistic person. I'm autistic. No, you're not autistic. I would know because I have a son who's 5 years old and he doesn't speak, and you are not like him. You're not autistic. Yeah, I'm aware that I can speak, but I'm still autistic. I was professionally diagnosed when I was in high school, so I'm still autistic. I'm autistic. No. It is so disrespectful that you are claiming to be autistic. My 5-year-old son cannot... Oh my God, shut the fuck up. Yes, I am not your child. It's almost like I'm a 29-year-old human being. Why would I be like your child? And second of all, what do you think happens when your child grows up? Do you think the autism just stops when he turns 7? Do you think he puts down the dinosaur and suddenly he can read social cues? No! Autistic children grow up to be autistic adults, but people like you make it so fucking hard all the time. Jesus Christ. Will you ever just please, for the love of God, shut the fuck up? Wow, you are so aggressive. Oh, I'm sorry. Was that socially inappropriate of me? Not like that's an autism trait or anything.
Because they couldn't say no. It kind of begs the question, what are white liberals willing to sacrifice?
Absolutely nothing, and I'm gonna tell you why. I've been talking about this repeatedly. It needs to get to the point where the danger is knocking on their door. And it's not yet. Actually, the danger is nowhere near the average white liberal right now. And that's really another point I want to make. Proximity. When we talk about what's happening in the world, it's almost all affecting brown and black people. So as a non-brown and black person seeing all this, you're like, okay, I need to act, but it's not like it's coming to me yet. So I'm still gonna, ease into my comforts a bit, but I'll also dabble in a little social activism just so I can look like I'm a part of the cause or the movement. They are not taking this as serious as all of us are because they know that they're not as close to the danger as we are. And as liberals, they know that the system is still going to work for them a little bit, especially being palm-colored liberals. So I don't think it's a matter of asking what are they willing to sacrifice, it's when are they willing to sacrifice and what's it gonna take.
He wanna get to know me. I said, boy, just bend me over. I ride him and suck him, lick him and fuck him, then I duck him.
Our generation is so depressed because we don't have a third place.
When people ask us why we're moving out of the US, part of what we say is that American culture and priorities don't fit ours. And that, idea is explained in a lot of ways by the lack of third places in the US. Or the potential third places that do exist have a high enough barrier to entry that you would rather just go home, right? Like you want to go get coffee somewhere is $5 or $6 with tip, a drink at a bar is going to be $10 or $12. So you might as well go home and enjoy the $20 streaming service you're paying for. And we're also taught and messaged repetitively to not spend on those things. If you go spend money at a local coffee shop, you should be saving that for a house because we've got to keep the housing market turning. But then when you start to look at the spectrum of European cultures, you see so quickly how they invest in and prioritize the things that allow third places to exist. And not even like we really want to live in Europe, right? Like everyone thinks about French cafe culture or bar culture in Spain. Like when it's $3 to go get a drink and half the time it comes with a little snack also, yeah, I'll go hang out at the same bar every afternoon, meet up with my friends, the people in the neighborhood. Or like in Italy where an espresso is $1 and pastries run the same, like $2.50 to go spend time with people in the community. Yeah. Or thinking about some of the places in Northern Europe where expenses are similar to what it costs to do something in the US, they've invested in parks and public spaces that are comfortable and that people want to go spend time in. Even though some of these places are thought of as more business-centric cultures in Europe, like it pales in comparison to what the US drives. Like you walk around in Copenhagen on a random Wednesday summer afternoon and there's hundreds of people along the water jumping in, swimming, hanging out in parks. But in the US, we make our park benches as uncomfortable as possible because we're scared that one person experiencing homelessness might sleep on it, right? Like we'd rather not risk a couple of unhoused people sleeping in a park versus everyone feeling like it's a space that they can go and hang out and spend time in. We've obviously experienced this plenty as we've traveled. That's part of why we, were inspired to seek out different places. But this especially hit home once we started traveling full-time and started in Serbia. Brooke would start working around 4 p.m. and later in the evening, I would take our kid out to the playground, and every single day of the week, any playground we went to, there would be 50 to 100 kids running around. Like their families would bring dinner out there, they'd meet up with their friends, their neighbors. It was clearly just a space where everyone came after work to hang out. And it would still be that full when we stayed until like 8 or 9 p.m. Like when you create public spaces that people feel comfortable in and feel at home in, they become an extension of your house. They become a place you live in and take care of, and that fosters community amongst the neighborhood. But a couple of generations of people in the US decided that building up your own personal empire at the expense of the collective was the priority, and now the US is left with the consequences of that, and we really wonder why people feel alone. That building up your own personal empire at the expense of the collective was the priority.
I love that we're having this discussion about third spaces and the way that unchecked capitalism has really harmed our ability and space to connect with people. But one of the things that I haven't seen mentioned within this discussion yet is the way that churches and Christianity has impacted this. It's definitely primarily capitalism that's the problem, but what we fail to sometimes recognize is that Christian churches in the United States have aligned themselves with capitalism. They have aligned themselves with unchecked capitalism and far-right politics. The majority of conservative Christians vote right, and many, if not most, conservative Christian churches encourage their members to vote right, and they push right politics. And one of the big talking points for conservative Christians specifically is how they don't think that the federal government, or the government at all, should be providing any resources for Americans. They don't want money to go to public pools, to public libraries, to public anything. They don't want the government to be covering food stamps. They don't want the government to be fixing homelessness. And it's not that they don't want anything to be done. It's that they don't want it to come from the government. The same people who are anti-food stamp run a food pantry. The same ones who are pro creating benches that you can't sleep on are, running the homeless shelter. The reason is they don't want you to go to the government. They want you to go to them. They want to be the center. They want you to need the church. If you need something, then they have an in to sell you on their God. And they're doing this with third spaces too. Same people who are voting to shut down funding for libraries and parks are running small groups from their churches. Ones who claim they're so worried about free government handouts are offering, free bagels and coffee on Sunday mornings. They don't want the world at large to feel like a community. That sounds like socialism. They want their churches to feel like a community. If the outside world doesn't embrace you, then their church can. If you're lonely in the world, then you'll go to them. And I'm seeing this even more in my small community here. My small city was considered a national bastion for conservative Christianity. Everyone looked the same, everyone believed the same, there was a church on every corner, even our public schools were handing out Bibles. And during that heyday, we had thriving parks and thriving libraries, thriving community spaces. As the area has become slightly more diverse, and as there has been a pushback against the same Christian ideals being shared everywhere and the expectation that everyone believes the same thing, suddenly we don't want community spaces anymore. We don't want to fund community spaces anymore. We want to shut those down, but don't worry, the churches will fill the gap. The churches will welcome you in. The churches have so many great community things for you to join. And it's perfect, because then they can control you. They can control who has access and who doesn't. They now have the power. And if you want something from them, you'll have to give something up. Like your atheism or your queerness. Small things like that. This way that Christian nationalism and capitalism have entwined themselves together is so incredibly dangerous. And my worry is that if we're not looking at the whole picture and we're only blaming it on capitalism and not seeing the way that Christian nationalism is also entwined in that, we do ourselves a disservice. We're not really going to be able to tackle this issue. Because the thing is, the people who are leading it, the people in power, may only be worried about the money, but the people enforcing it, your neighbors, they care about the religious aspect. That's what's motivating them. It's a more nuanced issue than just capitalism or just religion. Because of that, it's insidious.
Happy New Year's Eve. I am here to convince as many of you as possible to not go out to a New Year's party and get sick. The reason why is that currently there is more COVID going around the US than 96% of the rest of the pandemic. This is one of the worst nights you could possibly go out around a bunch of people. In the US, if there are 10 people in that room, there's a third chance that someone is spewing COVID out of their mouth. If you're in a room of 30 people, like a bar, there's a 68% chance that someone has COVID. Group of 50, 85%. Those are horrible odds. Now, I don't enjoy telling people don't have fun, don't go and party. I wish I could do that, but I've seen too much science and I've seen too many stories like this. So this is a Reddit user who says, I'm so done. Fully vaxxed and boosted and just tested positive again. This is my third time having COVID. There goes my New Year's plans. COVID has ruined every holiday for me. New Year's this year, had COVID Christmas last year, and Thanksgiving the year before. I'm so sick of this shit. Sorry for the rant, I just want life to go back to normal and quit ruining stuff. For all my fellow COVID positives, I hope you have a good New Year's despite this. What a way to start the year, SMH. And I don't want that to be you, but there are going to be literally millions of people every single day where that last story is directly applicable to. And COVID is just not a disease you can get repeatedly every single year. It's way more harmful than the flu. I'll probably do an entire video, spoiler or the TLDR. COVID infects cells all across our body, whereas flu is just a respiratory disease. COVID's way more contagious. COVID mutates more quickly. But anyway, that's another video. Statistics Canada found that in Canada, adults with 3 or more COVID infections had a 38% chance of having long COVID or lingering symptoms. And so you can see here there is cumulative risk every time you get infected, you don't have a better response, things don't get better, you just stack more and more and more risk. And so I'm not telling people to skip New Year's parties because a lot of people are going to pass away from COVID. There will be a lot of people passing away. But to me, at this point in the pandemic, the most common risk is long COVID. There's about various different estimates. This report found 38% for some groups of people, for one infection, maybe 15%. I think most numbers I've seen range between 5% to 20%. I usually say about 10% chance of long COVID. So of the millions of people who are going to get COVID on New Year's from going to a party, 10% of them are going to have some kind of lingering symptoms, and some of those are going to be debilitated. Some people are going to be bedbound because of parties they go to tonight. It's not a ton of people, but I'm pretty sure the science would say it's in the thousands, maybe even in the tens of thousands over, Christmas, New Year's. People are going to be bedbound, have chronic pain, blood pressure issues, brain fog, extreme fatigue. Long COVID has over 200 different symptoms. So my request is don't go out and get sick. Don't get someone else sick. Use this as an opportunity to reflect, set new goals for 2024. And what I'm going to be setting goals for 2024 is how to develop a new normal around not large mass gatherings, but smaller, safe gatherings with air filters, ventilation, wearing masks. There are ways we can live life safely, but like this Reddit user who just wants life to go back to normal, it's not happening. The people who said everyone's sick all the time because we had lockdowns in 2020, which we didn't even really have lockdowns in most places, but how many years can they keep repeating that? Oh, we took some measures in 2020. I guess that's why things are bad in 2021. I guess that's why things are bad in 2022. I guess that's why things are bad in 2023. Next winter is going to be the same until we actually make some changes. So that normal is not coming back. You can continuously get sick, or you can do something different. I'm encouraging you to do something different. My channel, a lot of other people's channels who still talk about COVID, they have tools and answers and ways we can do things differently. Getting sick every single year is not sustainable. It's not fun. It's not pleasant. And our bodies really can't sustain it. Our immune system has certain parts to it that are finite. We can't get sick every year. It just doesn't work. So Happy New Year's Eve. I am here to convince as many of you as possible to not go out to a New Year's party and get sick. The reason why is that currently there is more COVID going around the US than 96% of the rest of the pandemic. This is one of the worst nights you could possibly go out around a bunch of people. In the US, if there are 10 people in that room, there's a third chance that someone is spewing COVID out of their mouth. If you're in a room of 30 people, like a bar, there's a 68% chance that someone has COVID. Group of 50, 85%. Those are horrible odds. Now, I don't enjoy telling people don't have fun, don't go and party. I wish I could do that, but I've seen too much science and I've seen too many stories like this. So this is a Reddit user who says, I'm so done. Fully vaxxed and boosted and just tested positive again. This is my third time having COVID. There goes my New Year's plans. COVID has ruined every holiday for me. New Year's this year, had COVID Christmas last year, and Thanksgiving the year before. I'm so sick of this shit. Sorry for the rant, I just want life to go back to normal and quit ruining stuff. For all my fellow COVID positives, I hope you have a good New Year's despite this. What a way to start the year, SMH. And I don't want that to be you, but there are going to be literally millions of people every single day where that last story is directly applicable to. And COVID is just not a disease you can get repeatedly every single year. It's way more harmful than the flu. I'll probably do an entire video, spoiler or the TLDR. COVID infects cells all across our body, whereas flu is just a respiratory disease. COVID's way more contagious. COVID mutates more quickly. But anyway, that's another video. Statistics Canada found that in Canada, adults with 3 or more COVID infections had a 38% chance of having long COVID or lingering symptoms. And so you can see here there is cumulative risk. Every time you get infected, you don't have a better response, things don't get better, you just stack more and more and more risk. And so I'm not telling people to skip New Year's parties because a lot of people are going to pass away from COVID. There will be a lot of people passing away. But to me, at this point in the pandemic, the most common risk is long COVID. There's about various different estimates. This report found 38% for some groups of people, for one infection, maybe 15%. I think most numbers I've seen range between 5% to 20%.
Hot girls on TikTok, what are we wearing to run errands these days?
At 6 a.m. this morning, Seattle Parks and Rec and the Seattle Police Department arrived at Cal Anderson Park in Capitol Hill and began demolition of Black Lives Memorial Garden. The garden has been there for the last 3 years since it was established during the 2020 protests, and while it stood, it was a lot of things. It was a bright spot of native biodiversity in an otherwise monocultured park. It was a living testimony to Seattle's long and proud protest history. It was a memorial to BIPOC lives lost to police brutality. It was a hub for local mutual aid projects where on any given day of the week, community members could find free food, a warm drink, and someone to chat with around the fire. In my personal opinion, this last thing is probably the main reason that the city wanted to destroy it. The current mayor and his administration do not view unhoused people as people who need housing. They don't view them as people at all. They view them as a nuisance, which must be kept out of sight from Seattle's respectable homeowners by any means necessary. And in that kind of environment, a mutual aid space where anyone, regardless of socioeconomic status, can find food, resources, and community without barriers or stigma, well, that kind of space, blatantly hospitable to basic human needs, is considered a threat to the state, to the administration of Bruce Harrell, to the police state that we all live in here in Seattle. I am sad and I am still processing, but I have been trying to remind myself that Seattle Parks and Rec and the Seattle Police Department have a combined budget of roughly $700 million. The fact that on short notice, a ragtag group of activists, gardeners, and community members, both housed and unhoused, were able to hold them off for 3 whole months is an unequivocal testament to the power that we the people have when we organize, stand with one another, and hold our ground. There have always been more important fights than the garden. It is up to us now to take what we have learned here, take the connections we have formed, the momentum we have built, and to apply it everywhere else going forward. The fight is never going to be easy, but it is always going to be worth fighting.
Shocking fact, 45% of all public schools were built between 1950 and 1969. A quarter of them were built pre-1950. And guess what? The schools are making us sicker than a clearance sushi in a Kansas Kmart. I'm Devin Siebold. This is the State of Teaching. According to a report from the Government Accountability Office, 54% of school buildings require major updates that, if left unchecked, could cause damaging health concerns for your children. One school in Rhode Island had a 100-year-old HVAC system. What's wilder is half of Congress probably remembers approving the funding for the original installation. Schools need repairs. Unfortunately, replacing these parts are typically done on a low budget, causing even more problems. In Maryland, many schools that were given new AC a decade ago didn't have the budget to replace the pipes on the installation, and it led to a massive mold problem that will cost twice as much to fix as the original project. That's like an airline saying, we'll replace your luggage, and then giving you a Ziploc bag. Not gonna work. The scarier part is that while half of the schools have reported major maintenance issues, the rest simply say they don't know if they need fixes. Apparently, confusion is our 51st state. The problem is maintenance budgets were cut during the recession, and 65% of school districts report not having done any building assessments in the past 15 years because the funds never return. In fact, 21 states don't require building assessments at all, and 2 of the states, when the government asked them for the official report, actual government employees said they didn't even know if their state required an assessment or not. Can you ask for a works cited if they didn't do any work? This all begs the age-old question, if there is a forest of mold in the walls and no one is hired to discover it, is it really the cause of your kid's sickness? I'll answer, yes. 2 points Gryffindor. A study in Canada found that 70% of students reported feeling ill, and not just because they remembered they were Canadian. They reported symptoms of sick building syndrome. How did they know? Well, 89% of those students said their symptoms were relieved when they left the school building, and get this, there was a direct correlation between the severity of the symptoms and the age of the building. I call it Pigpen's theorem. Simple math. Don't believe me? Next time you're in school, check. See if the smartboard is simply screwed onto an old whiteboard on top of another old whiteboard, which is screwed onto an old chalkboard. Chances are it is. It's not laziness. Turns out they don't remove them at risk of disturbing the asbestos in the walls. It's like a Russian stacking doll of death back there. So where's the money going to fix these things? Well, in the last 15 years, we shifted our spending towards increasing the security of the buildings to protect the kids from outside threats like school shooters and terrorists, and bringing back frosted tips. Meanwhile, we have ignored the threat coming from inside the school, and no, I'm not talking about the one random brown peach slice at lunch. There's always one, right? Simply put, the budget isn't there to fix both. In fact, the money isn't even in the public schools anymore. In Florida, according to an official report, and I quote, all the money in recent years that has been generated by local utility taxes has been pulled from funding capital projects and has been pushed into charter schools. That is, by the way, word for word, the Florida officials' quote. Bottom line, the schools need fixed. Maintenance and repairs and new school buildings need funding immediately, or we will have a massive health crisis on our hands that not even Michelle Obama can fix with a vegetable chicken nugget. Till next week.
All right, so I'm black. Obviously, that wasn't the whole sentence. I'm a black non-binary person that leans towards like a more androgynous or masculine type of expression, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about what it's like for me to try to find like a hairstyle that's gender affirming. So like when you look up androgynous hairstyles or haircuts, usually like a mullet or a shack is what comes up. And they're super cute, I like them, but they definitely don't work on like my really tightly coiled hair. But I was like trying to kind of capture the vibe or essence of those types of hairstyles to see if I could like modify it to work for me. And I realized though that what I was trying to capture is that like messiness, and as soon as like that word or adjective came into my head, that I was like, oh, so I can't do it then. Because I remember when I was a teenager and I would straighten my hair and all the girls would do like the messy buns and it looked so cute. I couldn't do it because the thing about messiness on black hair is that it doesn't translate the same way. What is seen as effortless beauty on someone with straight hair or a white person is careless negligence on a black person. That like tidiness is not an option because it's perceived, if we're not tidy and we are messy, then it's just our hair's not done. I mean, I've known for a long time that gender expression and the way we perceive it has not accounted for black people or really anyone that isn't white, but it's just really been getting on my nerves and I want to talk about it with someone, but not a lot of people in my life understand the intersection between being black and gender nonconforming. So if you do, hit me up.
Don't worry, we're gonna make it. We've been looking for clues to find Clay.
Oh, I'm sorry. The clue board? You mean my clue board? That I made? We like the clue board now?
What is
Not a lot of people in my life understand the intersection between being black and gender nonconforming.
Ooh, yeah, let's talk about it. This actually kind of got my juices flowing. Shout out to this creator for expressing something that I've experienced but never been able to formulate myself. I am a black trans man. Hello, nice to meet you. My name's Rocky. I am black and I am also trans. And there is definitely something to be said about the lenience and the grace that white people are given in terms of their appearance. And let me kind of get into that. I think when I first came out, my perception of sort of like the trans community, and I still kind of feel this way, the trans community publicly is extremely whitewashed. You know, when you look up, you know, like big trans creators, they'll probably be white. I can't exactly speak for the trans feminine side of things, but the trans masculine side of things, I can for sure speak on because that is the community that I'm a part of, right? And when you picture sort of, you know, your typical trans guy, it'll probably be white, and especially in my age range, I'm 20. It's guys just kind of greasy white boys. And for that, sorry, I'll say it. And so when I came out, I was trying to emulate what I realize now was just whiteness, but what I thought was masculinity. Being a, trans guy, sort of, how can I emulate masculinity so that I can feel better in my gender expression, so that I can feel better in my identity, in my body, and the way that I look and the way that I'm perceived, right? And so I get, the big chop. I cut my hair, and I do the kind of undercut thing that was popular in like 2018. And I got so many comments on my hair, constantly, all the time. And now it's tucked up in a hat right now, but I do have really cool hair. I have really nice hair. But it wasn't compliments. It was compliments from black people, because they were like, ooh, those curls, which is like valid. But from white people, there's no grace. You don't get to look disheveled. You don't get to look messy. And I feel like a lot of the sort of the standard for transmasculine, people is white, and then just being a little messy, looking a little disheveled. You know what I mean? Because there's something inherently masculine, societally at least, about being a man. And so that is what I tried to do when I initially came out, and that just did not fucking work. I actually remember one of my ex-girlfriends, her mom, asking me if I could brush my hair, like if I had the ability to run a brush through my hair. And it wasn't even that unruly. It wasn't even that bad. Did it look a hot mess? Yeah. But I was trying to do something. I was trying to find my footing in my gender expression. And I just wasn't really given that. Sorry, I'm scooting my stool up because I'm getting heated. But yeah, when you picture trans guys most of the time, or at least the big trans creators, think of them in your head. The famous trans guys that you know. They're probably white, and they probably just look a little bit of a mess. And that's fine, because that's how they want to present themselves, and that's just sort of what they fall into. But when you're a person of color, especially when you're black, and especially when you're, still finding how you want to express yourself, there's no grace. There's no grace at all. It's ooh, that hair. Dude, I'm trying to figure some shit out. I had the undercut thing, like I said, that was popular a few years ago, and then I did a fro-hawk kind of thing. Now I'm rocking a mullet. But it's been such a difficult journey, specifically with my hairs, which I'm so glad that you brought this up. Specifically with my hair, that people want to comment and people want to say weird things, and you don't get to experience gender the same way being black. You don't get to express it the same way. You don't get the same graces. It's really difficult. So this is just opening that conversation. I wanted to give you props. And I know this was long. I just talked for so long. I'm so sorry. But I wanted to give you props for bringing this up because it's very valid.
Corporations got to realize that these boycotts are different for a number of reasons outside of politics. And we saw a glimpse of this in 2020. Let's use GameStop as an example. When the lockdown and quarantine started, this hurt a lot of companies outside of grocery stores like GameStop. People can't come into your stores and buy video games when there's a deadly virus killing a bunch of people. So people were forced to stay home, but they still need to buy video games. So then they go to other alternatives like buying off of Amazon, ordering, or just going to your PlayStation store or your Xbox store. And over the course of people doing this for a year, they realized something. Oh, me going to GameStop to buy video games have been incredibly ineffective. I don't need to go to GameStop to buy my favorite games. I can get these games for cheaper prices online, or even not even leave my house and just buy it off of PlayStation, or even just go to the Walmart where I have to buy groceries and buy it there. Basically, when people were forcibly stripped away from a service they liked and was forced to find alternatives, they found out that the alternatives were better, more cost effective, and just more efficient for their lives. And now we're seeing this again, but this time we are willingly stripping these services away from ourselves to boycott them. Like with Starbucks. People are boycotting Starbucks, which was a lot of people's only real source of getting coffee in the morning. And at first it was hard for them, but then they started making coffee on their own. Or maybe they started going to a local small business that was not Starbucks. And somebody even went online and posted the Starbucks formulas on their TikTok, so now they could just make the Starbucks drinks in their home. And people have found that all three of these options were not only cheaper, were not only better in quality, because let's be real, these companies are getting lazy with their product, and was also more efficient for their lives. And that's why these boycotts are different, because people are realizing just how replaceable and unimportant these corporations are. Starbucks can't just come out and apologize and do a bunch of good and then people start going to Starbucks again. No. Because even if Starbucks was to completely clear their name, it's not going to erase the fact that they're just not needed. Their drinks are overpriced. Their drinks don't even taste that good for the price. There are so many better and honestly healthier alternatives around. And that's why the red cup scandal blew up in their face. And it's going to get a lot worse for them. A lot of these long-lasting companies have been doing nothing but coasting, giving us the cheapest product with the most inflated prices. With maybe once every few months they give us something new that they quickly remove the second people like it. And through these boycotts, people are realizing just how badly they've been getting scammed for years. And we're even seeing this in our entertainment media. Disney's Wish movie, which was literally the laziest thing I've ever seen, that music was garbage. Despite having a budget of $200 million, only grossed $144 million. They lost $50 million in profits. A lot of people are not only sick of their money going to awful practices, but they are also sick of constantly receiving the cheapest products imaginable. The people are tired, and that's why these boycotts are different.
Genocide Joe has done it again. He has bypassed Congress in sending emergency weapon sales to Israel. This has happened twice in 3 months. The weapons that are going to unalive Palestinian people in Gaza, he's sending it to them. He's sending them the money. When I tell you America is Israel, America is Israel. The weapons they sent to Israel amounts to $147.5 million. You heard that right. When it comes to student loans, they got no money. When it comes to fixing homelessness in America, no, there's no money. Education, investing in education, investing in teachers in America, there's no money. But when it comes to unaliving innocent people across the country that has nothing to do with us, oh, we got all the money in the world. They will pull out money from their behind if they can. Yeah, this is the United States of America, the democracy country. Insane. Absolutely insane.
There's a reason that most people in Christian society know little to nothing about the bonobo apes. I first learned about bonobo apes over 20 years ago. Every once in a while, I'll get on the internet and do a little looking around to see if I can find some new information about them. Occasionally, I will find a documentary film or a scientific research paper that talks about bonobo apes online. But over the last 20 years, I have found that those articles and those documentaries quickly disappear. There is a deliberate and intentional effort to prevent Christian society from having an awareness of the lifestyle of the bonobo ape. Our cultural leaders are telling us that our closest animal relatives are chimpanzees, but this is not true. We are genetically closer to bonobos by just a little bit than we are chimpanzees. There are quite a few differences between bonobos and chimpanzees. The most notable is that chimpanzees are male-dominated and they are brutally violent. Bonobos, on the other hand, are known as the love monkeys. They're one of only a handful of species on the planet who have sex for pleasure rather than just for procreation. The reason that bonobos are so gentle and loving, as opposed to chimpanzees who are violent and aggressive, has to do with the relationship dynamic between the male half and the female half of the species. Chimpanzees are male-dominated, whereas bonobos are matriarchal. When a group of chimpanzees meets another group of chimpanzees in the wild, the most aggressive males come to the front and they all begin sizing each other up, and it is almost guaranteed that a fight will break out. When two different groups of bonobos come together, on the other hand, the males stay in the background and the females come forward to meet each other. This usually ends in sex. In bonobo culture, the females have a zero tolerance policy when it comes to aggressive and violent males. The females don't attack or retaliate against aggressive males. They don't have to do that. They don't have to put them in their place with violence. They simply cut them off. Female bonobos recognize the males who are the most gentle and the most caring and the most loving. They recognize and validate that behavior by showering these males with love. The aggressive males are not necessarily punished, they're just ignored. They get no love. The aggressive males get outcast to the outskirts of the bonobo culture, and the females recognize, validate, and shower the gentle males with love. This assures that the males who are spreading the DNA, the males who are siring the next generation, is gentle DNA. As it turns out, the relationship between the male half and the female half of any species is a very important dynamic. It's a very important balance. When we study cultural anthropology, we can see that warrior tribes, aggressive tribes, hostile cultures tend to be male-dominated cultures. In warrior cultures, women are marginalized and they are pushed to the side and oftentimes oppressed. When men are no longer balanced out by what women have to offer, they become rogue. Male-dominated societies degrade into Lord of the Flies very quickly. Equality between the sexes is very, very important. Men and women balance each other out. If a culture kind of goes rogue and becomes violent and male-dominated, the burden of correcting that imbalance is going to fall upon the female half of the society. When the men go rogue, it's up to the women to reel them back in, not by punishing them, not by rising up to their level of aggression, but instead being very deliberate about what type of behaviors and what type of men they choose to validate. There are plenty of men and even women alive today who believe that living in a warrior society, a chimpanzee society, is the best way to do life. Our Creator gives us the options of either living like the chimpanzees or living like the bonobos. There are plenty of repressed white Christian men who would rather spend their time on this planet fighting rather than fucking. What kind of monkey are you? Are you a chimpanzee or are you a love monkey?
On December 31st, 1862, enslaved people gathered together to ring in the new year. It was the day before the Emancipation Proclamation officially became a reality. President Lincoln had already declared enslaved people freed, but that declaration didn't actually take effect until January 1, 1863. So Watch Night, also known as Freedom's Eve, was the night everyone literally watched and waited for their freedom. They danced, sang, prayed. Many of them did this in secret, since celebrations for enslaved people were often criminalized. And then on New Year's Day, they ate a variety of cultural foods to celebrate their first official day of freedom, like collard greens, representing prosperity, and black-eyed peas and rice, or hoppin' johns, representing good luck and fortune. These foods are still commonly enjoyed on New Year's in Black households in honor of beliefs that are still held by many Black families today.
Bro, we are literally 1 to 2 generations removed from people who stopped taking a bus for a whole year just to protest segregation. And now 1 to 2 generations later, we have people talking about they have boycott fatigue off of giving up an $8 drink that they could probably make at home. Off of giving up an overpriced McChicken, because I know we all remember when them shits used to be $1.07, now they're over $3. You have fatigue from giving up an overpriced burger? I feel like that's when I knew that we had lost the plot. Yeah.
So what do people in Gaza do when there's no connections, no signal, no internet, or any source of news? They basically gather around the correspondents of different channels, especially Wael al-Dahdouh, the correspondent of Al Jazeera channel. See this. The most important thing in these days is to keep, as much as we can, of course, to keep aware about the ground invasion, the operations, what are the bombings and all these things, to keep safe and to keep our families safe as well.
People have this perception that content creators with a large following have access to all of these funds. But there is a huge difference in the way that POC content creators and white content creators are treated. And when I say huge, I mean $250,000 versus $1,500. This is the reality of being a content creator of color. This study done back in 2021 shows that on average, Black creators were paid 10% of what white creators were paid. And other reports show that Black creators feel like they have to be perfect in order to get promotional products from brands. And this is something I've seen and personally experienced. And this issue isn't just isolated to content creators. In fact, the former manager of the Hyde Park Lululemon store said that they were fired after complaining of racism. Recently, 14 current and former employees from Lululemon came forward and said that after the 2020 diversity initiative that they created, there were actually more barriers placed on their ability to succeed within the company. These barriers also echoed the sentiment that Black creators have expressed, that we have to be perfect in order to succeed within these industries. One employee even came forward and said that one of the higher-ups was just waiting for the wave of diversity to die down, implying that this entire initiative created back in 2020 for diversity inclusion was something done only to seem progressive and mitigate any backlash that the company would face for not supporting Black Lives Matter. These numbers are representative of a generational wealth disparity. $250,000 versus $1,500 is a wild difference. And while these are all anonymous numbers, let me tell you this. I've had conversations with my white content creator friends, and when we compare the numbers, they reflect all of that in 2023. A few months ago, a toy company reached out to me and my mutual that have the same following. I was offered $400 as compensation. They were offered $8,000. On another campaign for the same company, I was offered 70% of what they were offered. And when we were having this conversation so that we know how to negotiate this better, she ended up reaching out to the company and said, if we don't get paid the same, then I do not want to work this campaign. And somehow I still ended up with only 90% of the pay that she received. My campaign would go on to get 10 times the viewership and engagement than hers did, and I was still paid less. Not only that, but a couple days ago I saw a content creator come forward and say that they were not going to be supporting any of the boycotts. That content creator was represented by a management company that 2 years ago denied me. It did not want to represent me because of the social advocacy that I was doing. And once I was denied, I went and checked their roster and they were actively representing racist. 2 years later, they are still representing racists because they can excuse racism, but they draw the line at people advocating for themselves. And just 4 weeks ago, my partner and I were dropped from our management company for saying that genocide is wrong. And I say all of this because the wealth gap disparity that we experience as creators is reflective of the world that we live in. We need to make efforts to close every single wage gap, because the color of a creator's skin should not be able to determine whether or not they live off of the work that they do or have a slight increase in their work. All creators of color deserve better. All workers of color deserve to be compensated fairly. And in a society built on the backs of people of color, where our generational wealth has been consistently stripped from us, the least these brands can do if they're going to profit off of our trends and our work is compensate us fairly.
I think you should just shut the fuck up. I think you should just shut the fuck up.
Hey everyone, this is Bisan from Gaza. It's the day 86 of the continuous ongoing genocide and the last day of this year. We are welcoming a new year and we hope to reach for a ceasefire, for a truce, and to get back to our homes. Talking about the last day, today about 12 massacres were committed against Palestinian families in the whole of Gaza Strip in the north and in the south, and that resulted in the killing of 150 people and the injury of hundreds, and the missing actually also of hundreds of Palestinians. Today, 2 mosques were destroyed in a very crowded places in Deir al-Balah. One school called Siham School was bombed and targeted in Khan Yunis refugee camp. These are crowded places and these are massacres. In the north, the continuous bombing, utterly workcrafts, airstrikes, all the bombings, all the targeting, even the snipers are still in the north of Gaza Strip, especially in the Jabalia and Beit Lahia places. So even if the ground invasion and the ground processes are not in a certain place, for example in Rimal, it is not safe yet. The bombings could target any place in Rimal. So talking about the massacres, we've reached unfortunately more than 30,000 people to be killed, including with that the people who are still under the rubble, unfortunately, because no one could rescue them during the past 86 days. As for the starvation and for the hunger, it's still the same, maybe worse, because in the north it's been so long time since the last time that any humanitarian aid truck entered the north of Gaza Strip. So today, the bombings were in Al Maghazi refugee camp, in the Brej refugee camp, in the east of Khan Yunis, the east of Rafah, and the east of North Gaza also. The numbers are terrifying, are horrible. We're talking about more than 57,000 people are injured, more than 30,000 people are killed. About 107 are journalists. About 191 mosques and 3 churches were bombed, were destroyed. More than 67,000 buildings, residential buildings, were fully damaged, and more than 178,000 are partially damaged and people cannot live in it. More than 1,900,000 people are displaced. More than 3,000 people are arrested. More than 20 hospitals are out of service and damaged. More than 193 schools are bombed and damaged. So the numbers are terrifying, and we're talking about, even in the cultural wise, more than 190 or about 198 historical and heritage sites were bombed. So the numbers are just the largest since the beginning of the occupation. Yes, the numbers of people to be killed in Palestine because of the Israeli aggression is the largest during this year, between the years since 1948. The numbers are just terrifying, and we just hope to finish and to reach a ceasefire and to welcome the new year 2024 in peace and with the ability to go back to our homes. This is for now. Keep following to know about Gaza, and Happy New Year, all of you.
And it's meant to capitalize on the fact that you can't afford to live anywhere. I am 100% serious.
This is the sign. If you didn't have it before, this is the sign. I'm the sign. The dude in the last video, he was the sign. We are the sign. This is a problem. Jeff Bezos entering the real estate market isn't so he can help you grow your wealth. He can help you feel rich. No, it is to further push propaganda. It is to further confuse the masses, because now landlords can't be a bad thing. If you've invested your $100 into a rental property where you don't get to see how the people are treated, how the property is maintained or sustained, you are a landlord. You can't be bad. I mean, you put your $100 in, right? Instead of teaching us mutual aid or making people have fair wages at his company, he's like, I'm going to give you a $100 deal to get in on the real estate game. That's the trick. It's a trap. Don't do it. If you are someone that is not interested in participating in any kind of electoral process, no civics, no city council, none of that, you are the people that need to be starting mutual aid where you live. You need to be reaching out to your neighbors. You need to be building community with the people within your vicinity, if that is you. If you are someone that is willing to be a little bit more electorally involved, That's not even a real phrase, but you get what I'm trying to say. Somebody who's willing to do the politics of politics, you need to run for office. You can run for office with the Peace and Freedom Party, the Green Party, or the Unicorn Party. You need to be someone that puts yourself on that stage to advocate for the people who can't. If you say, that's not me, but I know a loudmouth, then tell them, show them this video. That is how we are going to make changes. Because even if something happened and they all disappeared, we would still need new mother flippers to stand up and take that mantle, to take that responsibility. If you are someone that is like, I cannot run for office, I don't know someone that runs for office, I'm unable to do mutual aid, then you are the person that needs to be helping to spread awareness. You are the person that needs to be a social justice warrior on the internet. Memes here, comments there, sharing videos and reposting everywhere. That is how you will show up for this. You spread awareness. I am running for president of the United States of America. My platform, guaranteed housing, no rent, no mortgage. That would defeat the Jeff Bezos of the world. That would defeat the landlord you currently have. That would defeat the person that doesn't want you to be able to live a thriving life. Because there are people, I was one of them, who was told, you ain't never gonna have shit, you ain't never gonna be shit, and that's where it's gonna stay. Flat, splat, and just like that. And I am fortunate, spiteful enough to have succeeded. But not everyone has the level of spite that has taken me as far as I've come. We have more options. Things that you learned in high school, guess what, baby? A lot of that shit wasn't true. And we can see that. So why are y'all still pretending that your high school civics education is gonna get you through this next election? If you have real questions and want real answers, I am not the only candidate that is third party that has a decent platform. I believe I have the best, but I am not the only. Joe Biden, Democrat, Republican, Donald Trump, they are not going to give you anything new. Anything in my 38 years we've been missing out on. People have been getting poorer. People have been having less money in their pocket, less food when they buy groceries. Less has occurred under both of those administrations. So if you are still team those mother flippers, you need to leave the room. Stick to mutual aid. Help your community that way. But everybody else who is ready to see and make real change and not just be talking about it, because people are dying. The reporters said their goodbye over the weekend. Bassan, Motaz, remember them? Palestina, they said goodbye. But you too afraid to make a vote different. You're too afraid to wake up and realize I'm part of the problem, I'm in danger, and I've got to change, because once they have gotten rid of them, they're coming for you, boo. Cop City is right outside a lot of people's doors, and a lot of people aren't doing shit. And for people who are like, well, Jasmine, I haven't heard of you. I've been here. I've been making noise. But your favorite influencers, your favorite news sources, your favorite people who drink tea in parking lots, your favorite educators that like to spend time at the White House, they haven't told you about me. TikTok suppresses people. I'm doing my job, getting on ballots, being where I'm supposed to be. Ask your favorite influencers why they haven't told you I exist. I'm being petty today because people are dying. Peace, love, and hair grease.
Defense of cannibalism, and I know that's a wild start, but stay with me. What you think of when you hear cannibalism is often not what it is in reality. People are quick to condemn all forms of cannibalism when really they only have two ideas for what it is. One, the one they view as acceptable, a person turning to cannibalism to prevent starvation, or two, cannibalistic murderers who snatch and lure unwilling victims to fulfill their perverted, animalistic desires. While yes, that absolutely does exist, it is so much more than that. The act of cannibalism is rarely about the actual consumption of meat, it usually is about the representation of something much greater. And that's why I love it so much when it's used as a narrative tool in media. It can be argued that cannibalism in itself, like how it tangibly exists in our world, is almost exclusively in metaphor or motif. To explain what I mean, we won't really be touching on its relation to media at all, rather some history and general general information to kind of demystify what cannibalism is. Before we go any further, I want to give some content warnings because I will be talking about not only slavery, but vile and racist beliefs of colonizers, such as equating black, brown, and indigenous people to animals or creatures. Also, really quick, I looked into the pronunciation of everything in this video, but because they're either really old or just really ill-researched communities, I couldn't find much, so I apologize. It's important that we look at the incredibly racialized history of cannibalism. There's a good chance it's no mystery to you that the common idea of someone savage is a deeply racist idea, especially when it comes to the savage cannibal stereotype. It wasn't until diving into cannibalism as a whole that I really was able to digest how far back and how deep its racist history goes. Ancient European writers portrayed cannibals as animalistic, subhuman creatures, despite the fact that most Europeans of that time were taking place in arguably cannibalistic practices, especially if we operate in the mindset that cannibalism is what it represents, not the actual action of eating meat. They spoke of a cannibalistic race that lived outside of the Greek and Roman civilizations that had dog-like heads. The earliest record of this currently known is in a 5th century BCE work by a Greek physician titled Indica, and as Europeans continued to colonize more land, their idea of cannibalism came with them. Even the oldest definition of a hack, Marco Polo, has some thoughts. Here's what he has to say about the island of Angamanen, which is among the Andaman Islands. This quote is particularly vile. "I assure you, all the men of this island of Angamanen have heads like dogs and teeth and eyes likewise. In fact, in the face, they are all just like big mastiff dogs. They have a quantity of spices, but they are a most cruel generation, and eat everybody that they can catch, if not their own race." Now that we know the violent image that is being pushed by colonizers, I think it's a good time to give some real-life examples of how cannibalism actually exists, like today and in history. It's worth mentioning that when I say today, though, I mean circa like 2006. Korowai, also known as the Kalufo, are a group of people who live in Papua New Guinea, specifically the Indonesian provinces of South Papua and Highland Papua. They're animists, so they believe powerful entities live in certain trees or parts of rivers and so on. It's important to note that the Korowai people don't really see themselves as cannibals and don't like being referred to as such because in their belief system, they don't think they're eating humans. They believe they're eating a negative entity known as the Kakwa. These are essentially believed to be witches that are disguising themselves as friends or relatives so they can eat your organs in your sleep. Most of what I could find about this tribe is through one Smithsonian article, and everything else just seemed to be regurgitations of the words from that article. But according to the Smithsonian article, before they die, the victim will whisper the name of the Kakwa that killed them, so then the tribe knows who to consume for the ritual. The ritual is mostly seen to rid Kakwa and other enemies, and only adults attend. But in this situation, cannibalism is not the act of eating an equal, because that's a key factor in order for something to be considered cannibalism. Technically, the parties involved must be on equal species standing. Cannibalism in question in this situation, though, is the consumption and thus eradication of evil. I'm also not here to speculate or try and disprove any of these beliefs with Western medicine and science, because frankly, that's not my fucking place. Personally, this is not more bizarre to me than some Western religious practices. I'm sorry, I was way more baffled when I found out there are Christians that don't believe in dinosaurs than I was when I found out cannibalism is still practiced. I can't prove or disprove Kakwa, but you know what I can prove? The existence of dinosaurs, bro. I mentioned something earlier about ancient Europeans taking place in cannibalistic practices, so let me elaborate. For example, medicinal cannibalism has been around since ancient times, the most popular form being medical vampirism, especially in Imperial Rome. People 2,000 years ago were described as collecting warm, living blood from slain gladiators because in Etruscan lore, it was stated to cure epilepsy. So yeah, sorry if the whole witch thing doesn't seem that far-fetched to me. Romans were also known to be particularly fixated on human flesh, the heart, bone marrow, and an infant's brain. For quite some time after the 12th century, Europeans have been eating and snorting Egyptian mummies. A real mummified body, especially an ancient one, was essentially a cure-all. The height of this practice was around the 16th and 17th century, and it started extending past mummies. They followed the Romans' footsteps with medicinal vampirism, as well as eating a myriad of organs and bone marrow. This practice was common amongst the highest and most respected members of society. Similar to the Korowai, though for a completely invalid and racist reason, Europeans didn't consider themselves cannibals either. In their mind, Cannibals weren't Christians, they were savages that lived in underdeveloped countries. However, this is even more insane when at the start of Christianity, Romans were considering Christians as savage cannibals for consuming the blood and body of Christ during the Eucharist. Which, if you don't know, you eat a bland-ass cracker and take a sip of wine, and it's like to commemorate the Last Supper. The cracker is the body of Christ. The wine is the blood. But the Romans viewed this as so vile that it ended up justifying the Christian persecution. We kind of circle back on my point because they weren't actually eating flesh, and the Romans knew this, but the representation of what they were doing was considered cannibalism. Since we're talking history, do you want to know who's responsible for the first appearance of the word cannibal? Christopher fucking Columbus. Basically, when he first stumbled his dumbass into the Caribbean, he said the Arawak people were kind, peaceful, and even open to the idea of Christian conversion. Somehow I get the idea that's not true, at least not how Chris took it. But anyway, once he realized he couldn't make money from the land, he turned to, in his mind, the next logical step, which was slavery. His sponsor, Isabella of Spain, however, said that Christian values were incompatible with slavery. People deserve to be treated humanely, damn it, until they refused to become subject to the Spanish crown, of course. If the indigenous people resisted Spanish rule and were uncivilized man-eaters, then slavery was officially a-okay to Isabella. And guess whose second voyage to the Caribbean in 1493 was filled with run-ins with cannibals, who in the end were hunted down and sent to Europe. That is when Columbus brought us the word cannibal. It initially referred to the Caribs and the Antilles who ate human flesh, but then eventually just became synonymous to any human that ate humans. Additionally, the Western obsession with the savage and the cannibal led to the creation of the human zoo. So Columbus, as well as Francisco Pizarro in Peru and Hernando Cortez in Mexico, went on to spread the notion that thousands of people in the New World were cannibals. They focused heavily on the violence associated with it, but never gave light to the fact that it was also performed out of love and the deepest of devotions. The Wari, indigenous people of Brazil, were horrified when they learned Europeans buried their dead. They couldn't fathom leaving a loved one to rot in the ground amongst the worms. Eating parts of their loved ones was seen as a way to keep that person close and their spirit alive. Now let's talk about Gong Qiao, also known as Confucius. He was a political theorist, philosopher, and sage who in 6th to 5th century BCE China had a doctrine that stated, for those who followed his beliefs, no possession was more sacred than one's own body, and it was even considered an ancestral extension. Sage is a Chinese symbol for a perfected human being who is extremely wise and tenaciously benevolent. If you aren't familiar with Confucianism, a very condensed rundown is that it's more of a philosophy of living rather than a religion, although this is debated. For example, it's argued that it's not considered a religion because there's no specific designated god or deity tied to Confucianism. You can practice essentially any religion in tandem with this philosophy as long as you are living within the guidelines of both, but we're not really here to dictate if it's one or the other. The main beliefs are respect for your elders, loyalty to the family and friends, harmony, and justice. It was essentially blasphemous to disrespect, neglect, or harm your body on purpose. There is one exception to this, however, in the practice of Gegu. This was considered to be a practice mostly for very highly devoted followers, most prevalent in the Tang dynasty. Basically, if a loved one got sick, you, most commonly being the child-in-law of the sick person, would slice off a piece of your thigh meat, or like any meat really, but it was most commonly thigh, and then you would prepare a meal with your flesh. Sick person isn't meant to know beforehand, but if they do, they just pretend they don't, and either way, it's not spoken about until after the patient has recovered, and then you kind of tell them what you did. The healing benefits, though, do not come from the flesh, they're believed to come from the act itself. Because they hold their bodies with such high value and regard, you can see how offering that for someone to consume, essentially so your love and vitality can heal them, is a massively meaningful gesture. This video is too long for me to do a conclusion, so basically, cannibalism not always bad. I hope this has been interesting.
Don't worry, we're gonna make it. We've been looking for clues to find Clay.
Oh, I'm sorry. The clue board? You mean my clue board? That I made? We like the clue board now?
What is